Hey everybody, welcome to Chapter 1, Assignment 1, the First Peoples, First Farmers, which is most of history in a single chapter. Tonight you're going to be completing Assignment 1, which is reading pages 11 through 14, and completing questions 1 through 6. And if you're wondering if there's vocabulary tonight, it is missing. There isn't anything that you won't be doing on your own with the first question that will help some. So, moving on. I'll catch you back here on page 11 for question support moving forward. We do not want to cattle, just wild animals to hunt and water that we can drink. That was the view of Guido Mejia, a prominent member of the Hadza people of northern Tanzania, when he was questioned in 1997 about his interest in a settled life of farming and cattle raising. The Hadza then represented one of the very last peoples on earth to continue a way of life that was universal among humankind until 10,000 to 12,000 years ago. At the beginning of the 21st century, several hundred Hadza still made a living by hunting game, collecting honey, digging up roots, and gathering berries and fruit. They lived in quickly assembled grass huts located in small mobile camps averaging 18 people and moved frequently around their remote region. Almost certainly their way of life is doomed as farmers, governments, missionaries, and now tourists descend on them. The likely disappearance of their culture parallels the experience of many other such societies, which have been on the defensive against more numerous and powerful neighbors for 10,000 years. Nonetheless, that way of life sustained humankind for more than 95% of the time that our species has inhabited the earth. During countless centuries, human beings successfully adapted to a wide variety of environments without benefit of deliberate farming or animal husbandry. Instead, our early ancestors wrestled a livelihood by gathering wild foods such as berries, nuts, roots, and grain, by scavenging dead animals, by hunting live animals, and by fishing. Known as scholars as gathering and hunting peoples, they were foragers, or food collectors rather than food producers. Because they used stone rather than metal tools, they also have been labeled Paleolithic, or the Old Stone Age peoples. Question 1. Define foragers. Stop and think, and respond. Yeah, that's right. They're collectors of food rather than producers. Continuing on at the top of page 12. And then, around 12,000 years ago, an enormous transformation began to unfold as a few human societies in Eurasia, Africa, and the Americas alike started to practice the deliberate cultivation of plants and the domestication of animals. This agricultural, or Neolithic, meaning New Stone Age, revolution marked a technological breakthrough of immense significance, with implications for every aspect of human life. This chapter, then, dealing with the long Paleolithic era and the initial transformation to an agricultural way of life, represents most of human history. Everything, in fact, before the advent of urban-based civilizations, which began around 5,500 years ago. And yet history courses and history books often neglect this long phase of the human journey and instead choose to begin the story with the early civilizations of Egypt, Mesopotamia, China, and elsewhere. Some historians identify real history with writing and so dismiss the Paleolithic and Neolithic eras as largely unknowable because their peoples didn't write. Others, impressed with the rapid pace of change in human affairs in more recent times, assume that nothing much of a real significance happened during the long Paleolithic era, and no change meant no history. But does it make sense to ignore the first 200,000 years or more of human experience? Although written records are absent, scholars have learned a great deal about Paleolithic and Neolithic peoples through their material remains, stones and bones, fossilized seeds, rock paintings and engravings, and many more. Archaeologists, biologists, botanists, demographers, linguists, and anthropologists have contributed much to our growing understanding of gathering and hunting peoples and early agricultural societies. Furthermore, The achievements of Paleolithic peoples, the initial settlement of the planet, the creation of the earliest human societies, the beginning of reflection on the great questions of life and death, deserve our attention. And the breakthrough to agriculture arguably represents the single most profound transformation of human life in all of history. The changes wrought by our early ancestors, though far slower than those of more recent times, were extraordinarily rapid in comparison to the transformation experienced by any other species. Those changes were almost entirely cultural, or learned, rather than the product of biological evolution, and they provided the foundation on which all subsequent human history was constructed. Our grasp of the human past is incomplete, massively so, if we choose to disregard the Paleolithic and Neolithic eras. All right, question 2. What achievements of Paleolithic peoples deserve our attention? Stop and think, and respond. Yeah, that's right. The initial settlement of the planet, our earliest human societies. That deserves our attention. Continuing on, the bottom of page 12. Out of Africa to the ends of the earth, our first migrations. The first 150,000 years or more of human experience was an exclusively African story. Around 200,000 to 250,000 years ago, in the grasslands of eastern and southern Africa, Homo sapiens first emerged, following in the footsteps of many other hominid or human-like species before it. Time and climate have erased much of the record of these early people, and Africa has witnessed much less archaeological research than have other parts of the world. Nonetheless, scholars have turned up evidence of distinctly human behavior in Africa long before its appearance elsewhere. Africa, almost certainly, was the place where the human evolution occurred, where culture, defined as learned or invented ways of living, became more important than biology in shaping behavior. All right. Question number 3. There we go. Why was the first 150,000 years of the human experience an exclusively African story? Stop and think, and respond. Yeah, that's right. That's because that's where archaeologists have discovered artifacts. It's where they're spending their time. Question 4. Define culture. Stop and think, and respond. Yeah, that's exactly right. It's learning or invented ways of living. Continuing on at the bottom of page 13. What kinds of uniquely human activity show up in the early African record? Well, in the first place, human beings began to inhabit new environments within Africa, forests and deserts, where no hominids had lived before. Accompanying these movements of people were technological innovations of various kinds. Stone blades and points fastened to shafts replaced the earlier hand tools. Tools made from the bones appeared, and so did grindstones. Evidence of hunting, fishing, not just the scavenging of dead animals, marks a new phase in human food collection. Settlements were planned around the seasonal movement of game and fish. Patterns of exchange over a distance of almost 200 miles indicate larger networks of human communication. The use of body ornaments, beads, and pigments such as ochre, as well as possible planned burials suggest the kind of social and symbiotic behavior that was characterized human activity ever since. The earliest evidence for this kind of human activity comes from the Blombos Cave in South Africa, where excavations in 2008 uncovered a workshop for processing of ochre dating to around 100,000 years ago, well before such behavior surfaced elsewhere in the world. All right, question 5. You don't have to do. Continuing on the last paragraph for this assignment. Then, sometime between 100,000 and 60,000 years ago, humans began their long trek out of Africa and into Eurasia, Australia, the Americas, and much later, the islands of the Pacific. In occupying the planet, members of our species accomplished the remarkable feat of learning to live in virtually every environmental niche on Earth, something that no other large animal had done, and they did it with only stone tools and a gathering and hunting technology to aid them. Furthermore, much of this long journey occurred during the difficult climatic conditions of the last ice age, when thick ice sheets covered much of the northern hemisphere. The ice age did give these outward-bound human beings one advantage, however. The amount of water frozen in northern glaciers lowered sea levels around the planet, creating land bridges among various regions that were separated after the glaciers melted. Britain was then joined to Europe. Eastern Siberia was connected to Alaska, and parts of what is now Indonesia were linked to mainland Southeast Asia. Question number 6. What advantage did the last ice age give outward-bound human beings? Stop and think. And respond. Yeah, that's right. The frozen water in the north created water levels to lower, which created the land bridges, which helped us get to other parts of the world. And kiddos, that's everything. Good luck on this. We'll see you back in class tomorrow. Bye-bye.